Hello.
Hey,
Let's see who shows up today.
Tom is here.
There
Hi,
I
Tom.
am.
Hello, Tom.
Good morning. How are y'all doing?
Good. I had 6 hour surgery on my skin cancer on Thursday,
Oh no.
and they had to graft skin off my arm and add it to my ear, so I'd have an ear.
Oh, wow.
So I've been like learning how to bandage. It's a little Van Gogh-ish. It looks like a shark came and nibbled on my ear.
I can't hear
Okay.
you. Hang on. How is it still painful?
Hey, hey.
Danny, is it still painful?
I took two ibuprofens last night. I'm feeling pretty good right now. But
Okay.
yeah, it's been weird. I can't do yoga, I can't run, I can't really do much until next week, which is making me edgy.
Yeah,
Mark,
of
good
course.
morning. Happy birthday again. I'm jealous about that dinner. I think next time you and I are together, I was trying to be really careful about making people spend a lot of money in hypertext. But if I'd known you're into that kind of food, damn it, we would have gone to Smith,
Well,
Chicago's best restaurant and listed in the top 10 restaurants in North America.
well, we were being
Damn
entertained by
you.
good friends, so I can't claim much there. But yeah, it was fun. I'm sorry to hear you're a bit crock. I must say,
I'm a foodie. I mean, I
yeah,
love to go out to a nice dinner.
yeah,
But I thought that place we went to, the steakhouse, was quite lovely with you and I and Mariusz.
it was. It was very nice. Yeah,
Oh, in
yeah,
Chicago.
Yeah,
yeah. It was
that was
just down from the hotel I was in.
Well,
I mean, nothing
Chicago's
special, but pleasant.
world famous for amazing steaks. So
it was
Michael is here, so that's nice. Good to see you again. So, hi,
Hello,
Michael.
good to see you again.
Good
Fabienne
to
is good
see
morning,
you.
Fabienne.
Morning, morning.
Hello.
Hello.
So a little bit of housekeeping. Hang on, I put on my headphones. That was a mistake. The sound is all over the place. Hang on, let me see. So can someone please say something?
Hello.
Hello.
Test,
Hello.
test.
Can you hear
And
me now?
yeah, but you're coming out of the wrong place. Oh, that's better.
That's usually the problem with me.
So one thing that is really important that we all need to be very happy about. Dini and I were talking about AI use in the community earlier, and we're going to drastically reduce that because AI is different, as Danny pointed out, than it was when we started this stuff. So what I did, I went through all of last year's meetings and did the summary stuff and posted them on our webpage. So we have a nice record there. But there is something about taking all of our stuff and putting it into, teaching the AI. I've been using Anthropic, Claude, and it's all very good and impressive, but that is, of course, not the whole story. There are issues of privacy. There are other issues. So now that we have successfully completed absolutely everything we needed to do with the ACM hypertext experience, which just needs some polish, that will be our absolute number one priority. I think we can change a lot of rules for the last 3 months that we have together for this particular project. So the first thing we will do, I will upload the videos as before to the YouTubes. I will manually try to think of the topics we covered and give it a title because it's actually quite useful. I will probably get it wrong a lot, and that just requires you, as some of you have done, to email me, text me, Slack me, whatever, and say, that's not really what we talked about, right? I also last year, when I went through, it took me an entire day. The meetings last year, it also generated the names of the people in the meetings. It got one wrong, and that's enough just to not do that because that's silly, right? So there's drastic reduction in the use of AI. Anyone have any massive agreements or disagreements on it? Okay, I see lots of thumbs from Fabian. And also, today's session, Fabian, I'm going to apologize to you again. Fabian had made a presentation. I misread some of the priorities for Fabian. I thought it was something he wanted to do if we had nothing else to do. I got all overexcited about this phase or part of the project or whatever we call it. So I, much later than I should have, texted Fabian and said, hey, let's change it a bit. He didn't say the message in time, not his fault, my fault. So it's been a bit of a mess about what to talk about and to present today. So Fabian, I apologize again. My enthusiasm is good at times, not always, especially with something like this. So yeah, double apology to that. If you would like to present on web browser engineering today, Fabian, or at any other time, that would be wonderful, but absolutely don't feel like you have to. It was a mistake. I am very good at those, as I hope some other people are.
So on the AI topic, Frode, a couple of suggestions. First of all, Google has, surprisingly enough, much stricter privacy controls than the other ones. That's kind of a byproduct of all of the scrutiny they've been under from the EU and others. But it's carried over into the AIs, into the Gemini product. The other thing is I make frequent use of NotebookLM, which is also a Google product, but then you can simply control everything that's in there. So you could say upload the transcript and ask it to summarize within that, and it wouldn't it stays within the walls of the RAG at that point.
Yeah, I believe you, Tom. I don't fully believe all of that Google stuff. But what I am doing for my own software, we're going through a release cycle now. Author just got updated, featured in the App Store, yay. Now we're doing Reader. Once that is done, I'm going to access the local Mac on Silicon on machine to see if it's useful, because then it ain't going nowhere. So the benefits of AI are clear, but right now what they are potentially connected to is a bit too murky.
I can see that. Yeah, I mean, obviously the ultimate is to just do it locally. And I have a Mac Studio M4 Max, which I use to run AI models on. And even with that, which is a pretty, hot machine, all things considered, 64 gig of RAM. Depending on what you're trying to get it to do, it can be a little slow at times. Some of the models are getting faster all the time.
Yeah.
So that's good. But for the purposes of what you're trying to do, I think that would probably work just fine as well.
Let me mention that one of the things that came up, Mark was at the conference too, at the Hypertext conference, which was really actually should be ACM Hypertext and AI conference from here on out. There was so much discussion about AI, and I attended there was like 2 people in the Meta workshop, and I attended that one. It was interesting to see how they're collecting data. And so what's changed with AI is that it's everything it's collecting is going into the stratosphere, and it's cannibalizing everything that's being said and done and captured, right? Okay, thanks for posting that, Frode.
So on Thursday,
and I wasn't finished yet. I was just acknowledging that you were posting while I was talking. And so what I'm concerned about is that before the project started, the Future of Text meetings were really just open meetings and lots of discussions that were healthy and important, and all of you contributing in ways that are very, very valuable. When the project started, the discussion started moving towards the project. And the project is just so experimental. I really wanted it to be more just us talking about it and working out details. And as we know, there's been a lot of pushbacks and little tension here and there. I don't want that add-on. I don't want Sloan finding that personally. I don't want Sloan seeing that we're struggling, that we're getting that. And I also don't want the world to know what we're doing yet necessarily. I want us to work things out in a way that makes sense. And that's not helping if AI's got it and working with it.
Talking of which, Dini, when I went through last year's, every single one of them, I did run a prompt that included what was the feeling of the meeting? What kind of discussion? Were people happy and stuff? And it gave me shockingly accurate responses. So someone's like, oh, we keep this one private. So absolutely. So that's the strength of it. But where does it go? Now, on this Thursday, I'm going to be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Turing test at the Turing Institute here in London at the Royal Society, which is the same place we're hosting the Future of Text this year. So it'll be very, very interesting to hear what the perspective the speakers will be. There'll be, of course, people in our community. Also, the editorial of the ACM Communications magazine, it's downstairs, sorry. The question is exactly what Dini said. Is AI killing the web? The fact that we do a normal Google search now, and we get a summary at the top. How does that help anyone make a web page? So I think we should take a page from Fabienne's book. Fabienne has been very pushy in the best sense of documents. Keep things as documents to push them around. Absolutely think that is important. We've got to own our little piece of the world, share it as we want to. This whole database diffuse things everywhere is just a bit much. Mark, please.
I think an interesting observation that I've been watching. Tinderbox has been getting MCP integration with Claude Desktop, and watching people experiment, and as rather expected, lots of people who know nothing of AI have rushed straight in and are mightily confused. The explanation that seems to come out from sort of bright people trying to use this tool is that essentially it's like a rather overeager undergraduate. It's very, very keen, but it really understands nothing and has sort of little impulse control. It's also got early onset dementia. So every time it leaves the room and comes back in, it forgets who it is. This is problematic. The fun aside, but the challenge for us is this intellectually blindsides us, because we associate forgetfulness with old age, rightly or wrongly. So you've got this crosscut of two things that just don't make sense to us. So all our natural sort of intellectual defenses against some of the weird stuff the AI is doing is blindsided by the way it behaves. No fault in any of that. It's just that so this is one of the emergent challenges of this new thing is how do we learn to use it so that we understand what it does well and what it does incredibly badly. It's not that anyone designed it to be like that. It's basically, this is how the thing turned out. And we have to live with that, and we have to learn to use it. So I thought that was quite an interesting observation, though, as to a way to sort of understand your AI partner.
That is very important, Mark. And additionally, I would say, I drive a Tesla, pretty crazy Elon, obviously, and it's got the Google Maps integration, as most cars have these days. And I find I use it maybe too much. In the beginning, it was, I know where I'm going, but it takes into account traffic. But then I realized what it's actually doing is making me follow a line. I'm no longer aware of where I am. When you're on any social media, it's also linear. We're living in the most potentially multi-connected world digitally. You're on TikTok, next. It's there for you. So what you're talking about, Mark, about developing a level of thought. I mean, Dini's writing in the comments, it's shaping our behavior. Yes, it is. And Fabienne, you have this great term that we're using for our system. You talk about scaffolding. This is not a scaffolding anymore. It is a straitjacket. Right. And the reason, so Mark and I have been having text messages back and forth about the thinking environment, and we're both extremely passionate coming at it from different areas, and I think we all are. How the heck can we make an environment that isn't shaped by someone else, that forces us in a good way to think? It's not easy. Peter, please.
Okay, I just wanted to call your attention to academia.edu has added a new AI research assistant feature. So if you have accounts there, take a look. That's available now. And it looks like it is maintaining a long-term history of your interactions with it. So that should be interesting. So I slowly have it tweaking the papers that it's dredging up for me. It's a little bit clueless on feeding you the occasional paywalled paper that you can't get to, or papers in other languages. Now, this is really interesting because the service has its automatic translation. It has a profile for the author of a paper, but the AI is completely unaware of who has profiles on the overall website, and it's totally oblivious to the fact that it has the ability to translate those papers. So the AI is telling me that I'm sorry, it's impossible for me to tell you anything about that. And it's like, but wait, your AI.edu's AI and I'm asking about someone who has a profile page on your website. It isn't an external research by definition. You are talking about your own website and you don't realize it. Of course, that didn't go anywhere because it doesn't have any of that meta level reflectiveness built into it. Um, Another very interesting thing was one of the papers that surfaced pointed to a different service called OpenAlex. I don't know if you're aware of it, but apparently it has a huge bibliometric database of all kinds of papers, and they set it up so that that database of all of the citation webs is available as a download. So we could get that huge block of data and play with them. I'm not sure what we do, but it's a non-ACM data set that spans multiple disciplines, and it could be some very interesting data to play games with in the next phase of our work.
Thank you, Peter. I'm going to point back to what Carl said, but I also want to remind everybody something that's happening in academia. Let me lower my hand. If you haven't been following what's happening, the federal government is tracking faculty conversations, even on private channels and private postings and things like that. And it's using AI to do this. And it's firing tenured faculty for things that they're saying, even in private conversations. And there's a case that showed up today in the Chronicle of Higher Education where a person was posting on their private channel about their views about the federal government and got fired. And so just saying, we're living in times that we want to be very careful about this. I mean, the Monday meetings are online, and some of us have been very political in this realm here. And even though we may not agree with what's being said, it's connections that matter. So it's almost like McCarthy period, where this person says that, and you're next to them in the window and you're not disagreeing, or even if you're disagreeing, the fact that we're in this room together matters. So I want us to be very careful about the things we say and remind ourselves that all of us will carry this message online in the stratosphere. I like what Carl said here, and he said AI is a force multiplier. Do you want to continue, Carl? Please.
Yeah, I can just read it off. So AI will help you do more of what you are already doing. It will speed up an existing process. So it is a force multiplier. My sister, my brother, both who teach recognize this and are learning to teach their students how to use this because academia realizes this tech isn't going anywhere. It is impossible to keep tools away from students that will help them when they are stressed, especially if the tools are free. You're never going to get them away from it on the moral argument or even on the punishment of academic discipline. It's not going to happen. So at least at Mississippi State, we have like 3 separate clauses that professors are working into their syllabi right now. Either like use AI as much as you want. We don't care as long as you cite the fact that you used it and which one. There is like, you're allowed to use this specific AI for these specific tasks when the professor says so. And then there's don't touch.
Mm-hmm.
And those are being rolled out it's been given to individual professors to decide which model they're going to use. But for the classes that allow it and for the professors and teachers that are for it, they are having to learn how to teach what it is good and not good at to students, how to use it correctly. Because machine learning is a relatively complicated and math heavy and stats heavy discipline. And for folks in CS and for folks in stats, they can learn that stuff and they can learn how it works under the hood and learn to see the patterns of why is it doing X, Y, and Z? How do I get it to do what I want? For students in bio, chem, sociology, that stuff is so alien to them that you really have to learn how to personify it and how to teach them how to use it. And this is one of the key things that they don't get is it is a force multiplier. It will help you do what you are already doing faster, not necessarily better, but faster. And so if you are pointed in the wrong direction, if you're on the wrong path and you start using it, it will catapult you further along that path. And if you just are ignorant to the fact that you are going the wrong way, you will end up way off somewhere else.
So Carl, we are teaching in the program, but we're teaching ethics and we're teaching them how to use it in a way that makes sense. It's not replacing their brains, it's augmenting the things they do. So a lot of brainstorming activities and things like that. But my university just came out with a policy, and it's a directive coming down from the provost office, and we're looking at that, but at the same time following our own path because we think it's not going to go away. It's not a trend, but we have to teach our students how to use it ethically. Fred, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. But as a wise person said a long time ago, the future of text is not an AI forum. There's a lot of talk pro and con of AI, and it is a thing. It's going to remain a thing, and we'll have to integrate with a thing. With my software, I of course have integrated into reader and author, but it'll never write a single word for the user. It'll help the user find stuff, but that's my discussion another time. What I suggest we do now is switch over a little bit and look at what we might potentially be doing next. All of this, Dini, what do you think we should do?
I thought we were having a very fruitful discussion about AI and how it's affecting
Oh,
us.
okay. Now we can continue the AI discussion. When we go into politics, like even talking about how politics and academia, that in itself, I thought you would find touching. Sure, we can talk about AI.
I thought we were talking about more than that, and so how is AI affecting our project? How are we using AI to do the things
Sure.
we're doing?
Yeah, okay,
That's
I apologize.
think
I
it's
should have
not.
checked with you first.
Let's talk about what you want to talk about. You said this is not AI, so.
No,
Peter said, I wish the media would stop conflating LLMs with artificial intelligence. Yeah, they are two different things, Peter. But what's happening is that they're collapsed because AIs rely on LLMs or have, right? Not necessarily always. This discussion we're having today is not LLM, but it's taking this information and doing something with it. Fabienne, you want to say something about that?
I mean, yes. just also to preface this, that I mentioned it a couple of times, but I'll put also a couple of links in the chat. I think it's there is confusion that is done for profit, where some people, let's say Sam Altman and OpenAI, because it is the most famous CEO on the most famous company. The confusion is done for profit. Like they're promising artificial general intelligence the same way that Musk is promising self-driving with Tesla for. I mean, there are websites dedicated to false promises like this for Musk specifically, but from tech CEOs in general. And the confusion of mixing what's coming versus what's actually usable today. It's not a random excited prototypist like me who's like, yes, you will do this and that with VR. It is true. Sometimes I get excited and I confuse what is feasible today and what might be tomorrow. But I also don't run one of the largest for-profit on Earth. So I think it's a little bit different. And I think when I make promises that don't pan out, at first I apologize for it. It is frustrating for everybody who believes in me, but for myself first of all. But when you're not a startup, but a company like OpenAI that basically drive the US in terms of the whole economy, and then you are with Oracle and NVIDIA and all that, when you say artificial general intelligence is coming soon, it is a totally different thing. And then when you say LM is AI and AI is like artificial super intelligence around the corner, and don't worry, we'll get scale in terms of the machines, in terms of the data and all that. It's just a promise. And then when the person around the corner who doesn't have a PhD in computer science, they were like, yeah. They see also a lot of ads of whatever it will do, not whatever it does, which is what a lot of marketing is anyway, it promises. But when the two get conflated, one into the other, and we all have hope, like we all of us, I guess, if there was like a perfect AI solution that would do the stuff we don't want to do more efficiently and at no ecological cost and no social cost, we would welcome it. But then it get all confused. And what I'm trying to argue here is that the confusion is not a mistake. It's not random. It's done because it works. It's like the Silicon Valley promises again, over and over and over again. You just refine the discourse. Yes, there are progresses in how the techniques is done, like both the crawling of data and how to store it on large database and using it in GPUs and all this. There is some genuine progress, but not at the same pace as the promises. And I think we have to be pragmatic about this. So I think, again, the confusion is not random and it's not a mistake. The confusion keeps on happening, one cycle of hype after the other. So I think it's when it's entrenched in academia, in every corner of our personal life, professional life, and politics, as has been said, it is generally dangerous.
Thank you, Fabien. I see that Carl says my soapbox marketing is the bane of our existence. Is that putting it mildly?
Yeah. I think most of us are old enough to remember the 2000 to 2008 time frame as far as technology and consumer products was concerned. And it feels like a fundamentally different time period. And it really was. I don't think people really truly grasp just how much the widespread common adoption of the internet affected businesses. Because before, you could create products like Toys R Us. You make a product, even if it's like a game, whether it's a box game, it doesn't matter. In order for a consumer to learn about that product, they either walk past it on a shelf in the store, or they know somebody who physically has that thing and has told them about it. Hey, I played this game and this is how it works, and it's fun or it's not fun. Now, you can find any review for any product, no matter how obscure, on the internet in like a couple of minutes. Sometimes before the product is even released, because people get their hands on it early, things are leaked, it doesn't matter. In addition to the consumer side of things, you have the business side of things, specifically with marketing. Companies can, in seconds, in real time, look at what are our competitors doing? How do we market this? How do we model this to optimize for any given metric? And the only metric most people optimize for is how much money we can make every quarter. And that free and easy access to information about other businesses made the like free market and open market for businesses and how competition worked go the wrong way. That now everyone has access to the ideas, the models, the structure for how to run a business as clean, cutthroat, and optimized as possible. And so everybody does it that way.
I was going to say, it's interesting you say that, because years ago when I came here in 2006, there were hardly any companies with websites. It was interesting, 2006. And so when I got here, let me put my hand down for a second. Hang on, because I'm getting that message. Okay. So when I got here, I was trying to build my program. I had 44 students, and that was it. And it's 24 Dell computers in a lab and hardly any software, and I was supposed to teach production. So I went out and there's a book that was published every year called The Book of Books, and it was a list of every company in the region. And there was 1,800 companies that were tech companies. And I realized that, those companies like Intel, and they were not my market. That really and truly what I needed to do to help the community was to look at the mom and pop shops in town, the local plumbers, the local banks, because they needed websites. And so I began teaching and going and doing free workshops. I'd go to the IHOP at 7 o'clock on Monday mornings and meet with the local plumbers and drywall guys, and would help them with their websites and talk to them about marketing, like how to get the information out about their companies. And that was it was a heartening thing to do because they were people that needed help and they didn't have the money, the marketing money that some of the big national companies that were coming into town had. The local banks didn't have the money that the Bank of America had. So how do I help them? So we began building the websites and doing social media for these local companies. I found that to be heartening, Carl. What is not heartening is the way it's turned out for the bigger fish, right? The little companies still need us and we're still working with them. My students get jobs, with those companies. I have 3 at Riverview Bank right now, right? And so that's the difference. It's how to work ethically. And one more thing I'll say, and then I'll put my hand down. The problem, from my perspective, having taught now for over 40 years, 45 years, is that we don't teach ethics anymore. We took ethics out of the curriculum in the early 90s. We took logic out of the curriculum in the US in the early 90s. I watched it happen. As soon as that happened, it happened at the same time that the web was starting to take off, right? The early to mid 90s, when people began to get on AOL and CompuServe, and then starting to put their websites together in 95. That's exactly when we needed those courses. And to this very day, we don't offer ethics and logic. And instead, we're teaching things that are identity politics instead of human politics. Like, what does it mean to be human and to treat each other kindly? That's a bigger issue. And we're not doing it. And these people are going out and starting companies and going to work with big companies and bringing bad practice with them. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
To quickly bounce on that, also I put a link on the chat of ethics in mathematics. I discovered this at a hacker conference, and the idea there is like it doesn't matter if you're doing pure mathematics and you think your field is abstracted away from any actual human, let's say, consequence, no societal consequence, social consequence, because it still might. Like somebody might implement this, somebody might implement your ideas. So you cannot be naive about this. You might want to be totally detached of any consequence of your work, but that's just being naive. That's just wishful thinking that somehow you might make an amazing discovery and it will only be used positively. But yeah, that's the whole point about ethics in mathematics, but yeah, same in computer science, in AI, etc. It's like if you think you're in a
I mean, lit. I mean, people, I watched people misbehave in my career, and it didn't matter what field they were in. They didn't understand,
But I think in math specifically, people like pure mathematics, they feel they were detached from the real world because they study abstract objects. And so they kind of give themselves a license, and this comes from professors at Oxford and Cambridge teaching just pure mathematics. Like no consequence, people are not going to become like actuaries or anything like this. They might become professors. And the argument still is that no matter how detached, maybe poetry, I guess there was not discussed then, but that it will have consequences. So you cannot just discard it. And I think my personal view is I love computer science and software because I can change the small world around me. Like literally how I use my computer is the tool through which I see the world, the window through which I see the world, and I can change that. So there is power with this, but that power also comes with a cost. Like you need to understand how people are going to use it, misuse it, etc. So anytime you touch, you explore a field, it will have ethical consequences. And here I feel it's the same. That in AI, it's just so important. It doesn't matter. We must like quote unquote progress and power through.
Yeah, like I said, when I first got here, I inherited a program that hadn't really gotten off the ground. And so I spent that first semester studying the local community to see what it needed, but I also interviewed students and tried to figure out what they needed, right? And so we had a weekend workshop where we developed, and I started with the idea of what is it we want our students to be like when they graduate? Not what they should learn, but what they should be like. What do we want them to be when they graduate? And the big answer was we want them to use this information we're giving them, this powerful, powerful tools, in a way that makes the world a better place. That's not a hard thing to decide, right? So the next question is, well, how do we do that? How do we achieve that goal? And so I realized I couldn't get an ethics course through because they weren't necessarily popular anymore because they were discontinued. So what we did is we put ethics in every course we taught. So it's embedded in every course we taught. So there's modules, not just a module, but it's in every module. And that has made a difference. And so the 10 guidelines for our program that we built in 2006 and implemented in January 2007 embodies that, right? It includes that. And I had to fight to keep it in when the program became a statewide program in 2022. So anyway, Peter?
Yeah, in law, we have a very strong tradition of maintaining ethics programs, but it's always pretty much a separate class, and it's even like a separate piece of the CLE, continuing legal education requirement. But originally, there'd just be like the ethics CLE course that you take. But in recent years, they're sort of shifting that so that you'll get maybe, 2.5 credit hours of practice plus half a credit hour of ethics sandwiched into a program, which can work well, but a lot of times they're really straining to shoehorn it in. And a lot of it really comes down to if you wind up with a bad economic model for your law office, you're going to wind up cutting corners and there are going to be very, very bad results. And the one thing that we really do not teach even remotely in law school is the business of law. So anyone who completes their law degree, passes the bar, and then decides to hang out a shingle and try to start their own law firm is in for a world of pain. And the economic, realistically, the clients you get, let's say you just come out of law school, you don't have any reputation as being a descendant of a scion of one of the big famous law firms. The clients that will come to you are going to be the ones who can't afford to go to an established law firm. They'll come in and they will lie to you. And this causes a real problem for the lawyer because one of the things we're not supposed to ask the client if they did it. We're supposed to, if they tell you, that's fine, but that's really not supposed to enter the equation because the minute you know that they did it, it affects the legal advice that you're permitted to give to them. And the worst case scenario is you get a client who actually didn't do it. And then let's say you have a criminal client who didn't do it. They come in and they tell you they didn't do it. However, they're being charged by the district attorney with an upscale version of the crime that's orders of magnitude than what they may have possibly done. So instead, you overcharge them and you tell them that unless you take a plea deal, we are going to arrange to have you locked up for the next 30 years, or you can say you did this minor little thing. I can get a check off on my resume as having had yet another successful prosecution, and you'll get maybe 6 months in jail versus the possibility of getting 30 years in jail. And the client would come to you and say, what are you doing? Now, if the client has told you that they didn't do it, you are now barred by legal ethics from telling them to take the plea deal. And you've got to tell them that I can't let you say that you did it and take the plea for purposes of ensuring that you only spend 6 months in jail versus risking losing 30 years. So you actually wind up seeing more career criminals taking their chances at trial versus truly innocent people who wind up getting railroaded. And it's just a horrible thing. The whole concept of plea bargain is just like the antithesis of being ethical in the first place, because it incentivizes prosecutors to lie about what they think the person did for the purpose of using the threat of an unpredictable jury to force them to make that equation in their head of, okay, I'll just go along with this and let myself get railroaded because if I don't, I'm risking my family losing me for the next 30 years. And it's pure evil. The profession shouldn't allow it, but in order for the system to function, it's embedded in that they do. Same thing on unethical judges. And this is a major problem. You have a lot of unethical judges, but it's generally viewed as being better for the system's survival to allow unethical judges to operate than to acknowledge the possibility that unethical judges could exist. And we actually had some of the CLE courses ingrain in the lawyer that if you start accusing the judge of bias, even if there really is bias and you think there's bias, the danger to the system is so high that the chances of your being able to prevail and make a case are so exceedingly unlikely that you really don't want to do it. I won't say it outright, but the message that they drum into every lawyer watching the CLE programs is if the judge is dirty, you pretend that all of the judge's insanely wrong rulings in matter after matter after matter are just a function of innocent mistake, because we're not allowed to go there to the possibility of there actually being political bias or malice embedded in the judiciary. And it's a major, major crisis in the profession. That and the plea deals are a major crisis. But the alternative to do things really straight and above board would be to require us to stand up way more courtrooms, have way more judges in the country, get a lot more flexible in when we agree to change venue, which is almost impossible now. So you can have someone going in to a jury pool that is going to be composed 98% of people of the opposing political party in a politically oriented case, and your chances of getting that venue shifted are exceedingly low, because if we allow that venue change, then people might start looking at venue in other matters and anything that could call into question the overall system. The importance of preserving the illusion that the system is flawless is vastly more important than trying to correct actual flaws in the system. And it's very depressing.
Thank you, Peter.
Do any of
It's
you,
impressive.
sorry, Dini.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and this is going to sound trivial, and I'm not at all meaning to be trivial, but do any of you watch the American TV show The Rookie? I'm bringing it up because it's about a 40-year-old who decides he wants to become a police officer in the LAPD. It is a ridiculous, it's based on a truth, as in, there was a story there. But what they've done is kind of interesting in regards to what we're talking about, ethics, law, and all of this stuff. It's probably the best PR the LAPD has ever had. Obviously, they've done a lot of naughty things, right? But it's interesting how fiction can really help us get to grips with some of these things. Some of the episodes are very, oh, you shouldn't have done this. Is this ethical? But at least it's being discussed. In most other shows, the discussion comes down to like Law and Order or The Good Wife, and really good shows. It's kind of simple. So I'm wondering where these morality discussions need to be now. Do they need to be on television? Do they need to be on TikTok? Definitely need to be in the classrooms. There's no question about that. But I'm just wondering where they sit in our society today. Dini.
They've always sat in the stories we tell. Fables, right? Let's go back to the first stories, fables, right? There's a book called The Literary Mind, very small book. It's about maybe 100 pages, and he talks deeply about the need for fables and why we tell them. They exist in literature. People want to hear what happens to other people to make sense of their own lives. It's easier to tell things in science fiction, to wrestle with gender, for example, in something that Octavia Butler has written, he, she, it, than it is to talk about it in the moment with human beings in the room as if it's really happening in the room, right? So science fiction is a place we put a lot of these discussions. I just showed on Friday night, we had a geek movie night in my program, and we showed Blade Runner, the director's cut. And what was interesting about that is that, we study AI in our program. So what does it mean to be human? And what's interesting about Blade Runner, I'm sure you've all seen it, please tell me you have, is that we have these androids that live for 4 years and they're desperate to stay alive. They're desperate to transcend the mortality they've been given, to the point where they're able to go back to their god, right, the Tyrell Corporation, and threaten him and get more life out of him for them. And it fails. And so these issues we grapple with in real life are so wonderful in film, in stories, in books. And so this morning, Frodo, you and I were posting our favorite books. Mine is The Odyssey, right? Yours was The Birds. But we have these things play out in these, because it's less political, it's less painful when it happens in fiction than when it happens in our real lives. Peter, your hand's up. And I'm going to say this, my cat is scratching me, so I'm going to put him outside now. I'll be right back. Come on, you.
Yeah,
Come on.
another interesting wrinkle is in certain jurisdictions, I won't say which, there have actually been efforts by the courts to institute rules to prevent people from gathering statistical databases on how the judges are ruling in matters to try to make it impossible for you to have the data that you could perform the analysis on that would show that there are problems in those courts. And that just blew my mind away when I was reading that. You know, we really should have that data be available so that we can use AI. And this might be something that could help legal ethics, as if we could turn AI loose and identify which judges are evidencing bias in various ways, make that available, and start using that in some of the assignment decisions and changing venue rulings and things. We could make things so much better. So there is a potential for the technology to be applied to good purposes that could really improve the quality of delivered justice. But you need to have the data available, and there's a segment of the legal community that would like to bury their heads in the sand and pretend that there aren't any problems, again, for the sake of maintaining a belief in the mythical system as being primarily directed at achieving abstract justice, as opposed to just dealing with the backlog of the sheer number of matters in front of it. And we don't have anywhere near the number of courts and judges to be able to dispose of matters in a reasonable time period. One of the fun things I was asking the AI about this. I was plugged into one of the chat systems, and I said, how could we reduce the backlog of time in the judicial system so that commercial matters could be disposed of within, say, 3 months of their arising? And the AI just totally freaked out and suggested any possibility could lead to disproportionate benefits for people who are wealthy, and it just wouldn't even let you explore the question, because the guardrails that are baked in to the AI systems prevent you from looking at alternatives to the conventional model of ethics that have been put in by the system developers. So we really need to have some unaligned AIs that we can work with, as opposed to the effort to try to make things safe. You can have a lot of harm passed off in the name of safety.
Absolutely, Peter. And Frodo, your hand's up.
Yeah, I'm loath to discuss the American legal system, and Tom in the chat here points out an absolutely horrible case. But I expect most of us have all. So I'm going to ask you all, kind of going back to our project. When we are looking at things in space, the very first discussion Chris Guttridge, Mark Anderson, and I had at the University of Southampton way back when we started all of this was, how do we go between narrative and nonlinear? So what we're bringing into the conversation today is the importance of narrative. So if you're in a space with stuff all over the place, you may, if you are very methodical, you may have a spatial hypertext if you wanted to, if that's the thing. You may also have something that is impossible for someone else, right? So what might be the perspectives of, already we have an issue with filming 180 degrees, so 360. For the artist, the photographer, the director, how do you frame the picture? So Dini was mentioning, I think it was last week, that I watch movies in the headset. I watch mostly, I don't often, but I do. The 3D things are really interesting, but they lack the framing. It's a very different kind of framing, right? So we're talking about going further with an actual scene. How does anyone have any thoughts on how to infuse that with a narrative? I mean, we have talked about basic things of having a voice in the room, but if there are any other thoughts, it would be really interesting to hear.
Well, if Tom's got his hand up, then I have my hand up after Tom.
If you want to talk about what Frodo just talked about, my comment / question predates his comment just now. But if you want to go first, Dini, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, thank you. And I'll just make it quick. I guess my question for you, Frodo, is to define narrative, right? For me, as a literature trained person, as a humanities person, narrative story, right? It's in the traditional sense, it's a story that's told in a sequence, right? That has conflict, right? In the West, we love conflict in our stories. And so you can't have a narrative without some sort of conflict. And conflict involves man versus nature, man versus himself. It could be one or all of those different combinations. So narrative is that, and I would argue that it's an issue of conflict, or as we call it in Greek, agon. The notion of agon, that provides us what Aristotle would call the ability to expiate, right? To eradicate the fear and pity that we feel every day, right? That the human condition, we are able to expiate and expel the things that make us nervous and scared and afraid. So when we go to theater, he would argue, we're able to watch what happens to Oedipus, right? And understand how our own condition is connected to that. Our Antigone, standing up to the rule of law at the time of Creon, So what does it mean? So to feel those things is what narrative does for us. And then Tom.
Hang on, just to on that. Sorry, Dini, I think that's really important what you said. I just on the sidebar, I'm just going to put the choose your own adventure books. I'm sure Mark at least knows about them. Where you would read and then you get to a thing and you go to another page. So there are different ways to have a narrative, but they have to have something there. And even basic computer games that aren't necessarily a story can have many narratives. Dini, please, and then we go to Tom. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's what the 21st century, late 20th century gave us, right? The idea of the non-sequential narrative that comes from Ted Nelson's description of hypertext in 1968. That pitted traditional narrative against that, and there's a lot of books about that. But traditionally, narrative has been this idea of sequential storytelling, hypertext, cut up poetry, a lot of different, late 20th century processes upended that. Absolutely. I'm not saying those aren't stories, but that traditionally, that's what narrative's been about.
Absolutely. Tom, please.
So actually, I'm glad I waited because I've added a couple of layers of what I was going to say based on what you just said. So first of all, I guess I'll work backwards. Talking about narrative. So I have a very expansive view of narrative. I mean, as a visual artist, also, I have a presentation which is called "Every Picture Tells a Story," and that a good photographer is telling stories through his or her narrative as they're taking, and part of that is the frame and the composition. And so what you were talking about with the 360 view makes that challenging. And I've always kind of avoided video as well as 360 stuff. I'll do fisheye because I think that's still framing it. But because of the fact that I want to be able to control the frame in a way that I lose that control if I'm doing video or something like that. In a way that, I'm not good enough. Let me rephrase that. You can do this. There are people who do this extremely well, but I don't have the time or maybe I don't have the talent, but I don't have the time to get good at that. But just sort of into the general point about privacy and information and narrative, I have believed for a very long time that, I hate to say it, but the privacy is basically dead, and that there's so much information out there that it's just impossible to hide. And you defend those things that are most valuable, like your bank account numbers and your credit card numbers, by not sharing those in ways that there are very specific ways in which you share that pieces of information. The problem is everything else, and things being taken out of context. The professor at Texas State who was fired for a comment that he made in a conference that was taken partially out of context, that seemed to imply that he was advocating the violent overthrow of the government, and they just summarily dismissed him without a hearing. We have to work on our cultural, legal, and other aspects to fix that. I have hope that in the end, transparency is going to be a good thing and will win out, because I think the people who've had the most power over narrative in the past have been the ones who've been able to control it. And I think increasingly these days, it's hard to control narrative because there's so many narratives that come at you that are so much, that you can be manipulated with. And, if I mentioned The Man in High Castle, Philip K. Dick, that book is about narrative. It is about who controls the narrative and how, and disruptive narratives. But it was also written in a time when, TV and radio made controlling the narrative a lot easier than it is today. And I can see where the fear comes from. I really can. And I try really hard not to fall victim to it. I generally go with, okay, fine. I'm just not going to do anything that I think is wrong. Of course, the definition of what I think is what is quote unquote wrong versus what I think is wrong is slipping. You know, I will defend. I don't try to be overtly political, but I do have this annoying habit of insisting on the facts and insisting on rigor when it comes to information, which a lot of other people might consider to be elitist and wrong or whatever. And so that's a challenge as a teacher and as a speaker that I have to deal with. I don't have a problem looking at myself in the mirror every morning ethically. But I can see where that could be an issue. And there's a certain amount of nervousness. I mean, here in Texas, we've had 2 professors fired in the last month over things that they said in class. And they weren't particularly offensive things in my book. That's scary. And I work for a public institution in Texas. So, anything I say here goes on YouTube and gets shared. And, I generally have that at the back of my mind, but I don't like to live in a world of fear. I really don't. I mean, I am an optimist when it comes to the future of democracy. I see the challenges. I also see technology as being critical at achieving those challenges. And I think AI is central to that, not because it can help people spy on us, but because it helps us see the world more effectively. It's a good tool for seeing things and perceiving things that we would otherwise miss. Because the problem with narrative right now is there's so much information. Everybody's scrambling to try to get a narrative. They're trying to understand what the hell's going on in the world. And if somebody comes along and says, I will make it make sense for you, that's a powerful thing emotionally. I will come and, this is, before it was simple. It was, when you were a kid, Walter Cronkite controlled the narrative and you didn't have to worry about it. But nowadays it's just, yeah. And it's a real challenge. It's a challenge for me as a teacher of politics. I'm actually doing a session on information literacy in a few weeks, which should be really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we can shut it down to the level that you guys seem. I mean, that it can't get out. That Sloan can't find it if they really feel like it, or that. Anything, it's all on YouTube. So, that's already been scanned. It's already in the Internet Archive. How are you going to exercise that? And I don't know. I mean, I'm just, wanted to talk about that. But I mean, the idea that we have to think a lot differently about narrative. And I think XR is part of that too, because, it changes how we perceive that frame. And it's like the difference between a two-dimensional wall and a 3D camera. A 360-degree camera. We have to think of it, that framing in that way as well. So
Tom, maybe I'm going to say this and I'll have to pack up to go to school, but maybe the future of text, one of the things we need to think about is how to make it personal and private again, so that we feel like we're able to communicate in a way that we can trust that what we say is being not monitored, but just kept within people that are in the conversation. I don't know.
I don't know if we can get there. I really don't know if we can get there. And I don't see a technology that wouldn't be horrible. It's like Madison talking about factions. He says you can get rid of factions 2 different ways. One, you can force everybody to have the same opinion, which is tyranny, or you can expect everyone to have the same opinion, which is fantasy. And, and so until you fix that problem, that's a human problem. It has nothing to do with technology.
I think analog. I'm going back to analog. So I'm going to say goodbye. Hugs to everybody. Thank you for being here today. Always
Bye,
a pleasure.
Deanie.
Bye-bye.
See you later, Deanie.
Bye.
Just briefly on that, Tom. Sorry, Mark, just briefly.
Yeah.
This is one of the things I think I've been arguing for a long time, and I think Fabian in a different way. Documents. Write a document, share it with someone. Letter writing with documents, Word, PDF, HTML, I don't care. But why should it necessarily live on some other system? Why not just send? I'm not saying it's fully secure. Of course, the NSA would probably listen into all kinds of things, including that sentence. But there are different approaches. I will not use Google Docs why in the world would I want Google to have all my stuff, as an example? I think you would agree. But anyway, yeah, right. Mark, please. Sorry.
I'm going to pull us back in. I'm going to try and address something that I think was implied in Freud's question earlier about sort of the narrative of what we're doing in terms of the XR and indeed work in XR. And I was reflecting on the fact, as sort of Dini was explaining narrative in a sense from the very much from the fully literary perspective. And there's a sort of the other end of that, I think, would be the sort of the engineering computer science sense of the most effective path through the network, which is a narrative. And somewhere in the middle, but probably more to the engineering side, is probably where some of the stuff that we're doing is. In other words, when Ted started out with his notion of this quite divergent and transgressive non-linear form, because he was at that point deliberately trying to break the hegemony of the sort of those who owned the print and said how things should be. But of course, and that was very much then made manifest in things like early hypertext literature, where the whole point is you don't really know where you're going. If you know where you're going, well, what's the point? Because then you don't get the experience. Obviously, if you are trying to work your way through a corpus of sort of interlinked work, especially if you're trying to sort of learn something, you probably don't want a fully random experience. I mean, it's nice to get lost on Wikipedia every so often and end up in goodness knows where, looking at Australian train systems or something, when you've gone to look about, I don't know, sort of calculus or something. But in reality, you want something, and there's an interesting tension and challenge, and something I know, having spent now 24 years writing a large sort of outboard documentation, essentially, of a very open-ended tool. Trying to figure out the useful paths, there are some high-level paths through the corpus that are useful to people, but there's definitely not one size fits all. Partly because we start from different perspectives and different experience bases. So without any sort of sense of tribal loyalties and things, there is just that. If you don't know what you don't know, so starting the journey to a place you don't understand is not normally helpful. So there's an interesting aspect to me of narrative in essentially hypertextual system, which is sort of where we end up when we're in the experiments we're doing at the moment. It wasn't deliberate, but essentially we take all these knowledge objects, we put them in a space, and we're starting to look at the relationships between them, whether those relationships are manifest already or whether we're actually creating them ourselves. And so coming along with that is the sort of the challenge of how and where you surface and imprint a narrative. I say imprint probably in the nicest sort of way. I mean, it's more like, it goes back to Bush's notion of trails. I think we need to make a trail through here because I can see that some people would benefit to know that these things are connected. They can branch off anywhere they like. That's the free will left in there for them. So we're not saying you must go this way and only this way. But just saying, here you are, here's everything, how about it, is also generally, except for the really expert person, not helpful. So in terms of the project we're doing at the moment, that's how I think of narrative. I don't see it in any way as a sort of counter to, for instance, what Dini was describing, because essentially it's as I say, I think it's somewhere on a spectrum between the most literary notion of narrative and basically a pathfinding algorithm at the other end. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Any comments or okay, over to Ashkant.
Yeah, lots of really great discussions, and yeah, I've been keeping notes from various discussions, so pardon me if I go all over the place. But one of the points I wanted to bring up was all of the rush to get to control the narrative, and I think a lot of the platforms that are pushing for even XR and trying to gain market control is kind of also along those same lines. I would argue, because it's kind of like whoever has the biggest market share also gets to set the narrative, and like I think there have been a lot of talk about Meta and Apple trying to control the platforms in XR, and especially Meta, like trying to be the next Apple for the XR headsets, and that's where they're like running into lots of losses in terms of hardware, but still trying to gain market share. So yeah, there was an interesting connection there. So I just wanted to bring that up. Um, then there was another point I wanted to highlight about theater and the narrative, how theater has been using, let's say, lighting and even audio and sound, as Frodo mentioned, right? So, like where the sound is coming from, and similarly using light to direct people's attention. So, there's framing, of course, but maybe these are some of the classic, maybe ways, especially in theater, I think, which is more active, real-time actors versus in movies where you have control over the camera. In theater, you usually have people sitting in the auditorium, and uh, you have to direct people's attention to different parts of the stage at different instances. So, uh, and this is a game that I have highlighted before as well, but it made really good use of this theater kind of style, Madrid Noir. I got to experience this at SIGGRAPH 2022, and I have since then I showed it to other people in my family, and we have really liked it. So maybe this can inspire you to make some 3D VR content. And then coming to discussion on privacy, I kind of have gone through various stages of this. Funnily enough, when I was uh, quite a bit younger, like in my ninth or 10th grade, I was more into ascertaining privacy, and then slowly I'm kind of feeling that I'm losing out on that battle. So I'm not that strict about any of the privacy stuff, but yeah, I'm a big promoter of self-hosting things, and I really like that about Fabian. I think a lot of things that he self-hosts, and even the wiki pages and all of his projects. I want to do more of that. Um, and then finally, on that same line, I kind of find it funny that when Google Glass came out, people were so against the idea of having a camera on that's always on and recording. And then, like, so literally against the idea. And now, Meta Ray-Ban glasses are selling off like hotcakes the past few years. So, and now it has become their biggest product, right? Like they're tripling a number of units sold and all of that. So yeah, in terms of privacy, I don't think like Meta Ray-Ban glasses are any more private than what Google Glass was all that way back then. And I kind of feel that it has become an even more difficult journey or a battle uphill battle with such AI glasses being released, and we are not exactly sure how those will be used because like you could have like a person's normal looking glasses actually recording you, and you wouldn't be any wiser. So yeah, scary world for privacy.
Really briefly on that, two things. I live in London, everything is recorded. I did an art project with a friend over a decade where we would, on the train, take pictures of the person opposite us and exhibit that. There was a documentary of London. Several people disagreed about privacy. Something else to discuss. But I'm saying even with a basic camera or basic city, we have an issue. But when you talk about theater and so on, one thing I find really interesting about stereo video in the headset is how the best things are basically theater. You have normal scaled people doing normal things in front of you. It's amazing how it's bringing it back. There are some really interesting things where you have like a zoom. It looks like someone is just getting smaller. So in a very McLuhan way, it's bringing back a different kind of immediacy. My brother is a theater director, and he's also looking to keeping it basic in this way. It's interesting. Anyway, sorry, Peter. And then I'm holding my hand up for Fabian, actually. I'll tell you about that after Peter.
Okay. I just have to tell you this story. Sort of one of those AI guardrail kind of things in real life as applied to law. There was an ethics course I took once, and it was basically sort of an anti-Paul Drake rule. And the ethical argument was that lawyers, as part of our ethical code, is we're not allowed to lie. Yes, believe it or not, no lawyer is allowed to lie about anything to anyone. Moreover, we're not allowed to ever counsel our client to lie. And furthermore, we're not allowed to engage anyone who might lie. Therefore, this ethics instructor was telling me that if a client comes in and says that, I am being sued by a bogus slip and fall case, and I think the guy that's suing me he made the whole thing up. I think he's really way more mobile than he says he is. What can we do? I can't suggest that we hire Paul Drake and have Paul Drake have a conversation with him to get him to agree to go on a hunting trip, which would clearly show that he'd been lying through his teeth about being badly disabled by the fall. Because if we engage the private investigator would be using deception, which is a lie, which by extension would mean I, as a lawyer, had lied and besmirched the reputation of the legal profession by allowing Paul Drake to tell a fib to a guilty person who's falsely suing my innocent client and prevent me from establishing my client's innocence. Furthermore, I'm not even supposed to tell the client that he's allowed to hire the private investigator, which is a perfectly legal thing for him to do, because of the likelihood that the private investigator would employ deception in order to prove that the person who's suing my client wrongfully was lying to him. It's just unreal. So in the name of ethics, they're guaranteeing that the innocent client is going to lie. Just like if the client makes the mistake of telling me that he actually didn't do the crime, I can't tell him that the rational thing for him to do is to take the plea deal for, say, 6 months of probation rather than risk hard jail time, because I couldn't allow my client to misinform the court, because we have to maintain the illusion that every confession in a plea deal is an actual admission of true actual guilt, and that no one has ever taken a plea deal anytime in order to curtail the possibility of their suffering the much, much worse fate of the actual outcome of the trial. And there's actually an expression among judges that, if you're going to make us take the time, you're going to do the time. And it's horrible, again, how evil plea bargaining is. So,
Peter, good point.
In the name of ethics, you can have a lot of unethical things be the outcome, and the AI systems don't recognize any of those nuances. I was talking to one about, how can we prevent crime maybe with widespread use of surveillance? At least then you'd be able to establish ground truth as to whether someone did it or not if there were cameras everywhere. And then suddenly the AI is worried about privacy and says, you shouldn't do that. Oh my God, the privacy considerations. How could you do that? You certainly don't actually solve the problem in reality and actually employ a technology that would eliminate the problem. No. Much better to maintain the problem in order to pursue some higher aspirational nebulous goal.
But this becomes political again, something we don't really want to go down. But just
Sorry about that. I admonish myself.
No. Don't worry, Peter. But just as a really brief aside, before I show something on behalf of Fabienne, where he will talk, it is the difference between Europe and China. I'm not saying one is worse or better, but I am saying that when you are in China, any big city, you're constantly under surveillance, absolutely all the time, by humans and systems. So you have a different kind of trade-off between personal safety versus privacy. Absolutely. Many things you're not allowed to do. Not a free country, not at all. But when you start going in these discussions, Peter, it's very well worth discussing in a forum for that. And now I'm going to share you a video. You can all see the video, I trust.
Yes.
So Fabienne, tell me an intro, please, and then tell me to stop and start, okay?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for presenting. I think it's easier for everyone than clicking on the video. The idea, and I wanted to share it because it's brand new, that was done this morning, my time, in Brussels. And because you mentioned branching narrative or interactive narratives, that is not just like listening to a story in so many forms, can be in video games, can be in books, like we I hope at least most of us did try. But that story here, and I think I discovered this morning. So out of curiosity, are people familiar with iFixit? iFixit.com. So I see some nodding, most nodding, so that's great. And if you're not, it's a website that helps you fix stuff. So it's documentation on how to fix stuff. It doesn't fix it for you, unfortunately. But what maybe most of you do not know, and I did not know this morning, is it has an API. And as a developer, if it has an API, it's super exciting because it means you can combine it. It's like, oh, here is the Lego blocks, and you can put the blocks together as you want. And like everybody else here and elsewhere, we have a bunch of broken stuff in my house, so that's never a problem. It's more finding the time to fix it. And of course, I have headsets. So here I do a little a simulation of a broken headset. Unfortunately, it was not broken, so I faked it a bit. But if you can play through the video, that will be a bit clearer. And it uses augmented reality, so it's a shame that Ken is not there because he's such a fan of it, of AR. And the idea is basically that through the API, you get your step-by-step explanation of how to fix whatever. So here, a headset. And through the API, you can have also the illustrations. And if you're confused, like here, I don't know what this ZMF connector is. So I just like, okay, I'll skip that step. But there is the name of the step, and then there is the text on the right with like details on what actually that means. The layout, as you can see, is far from perfect. It's a bit of a mess as per usual, but it's a real example because I use, if it's really hard to see, but in the URL, there is an ID with the idea of the iFixit guide dedicated to the Quest version 2. So yeah, that's the idea, that the narrative is the sequence of step on how to fix an object. So this is the Quest because I work in VR, but I don't know how many thousands and thousands of guides there are for like a dishwasher, washing machine, a bike, whatever. A lot of things, everything gets broken. Everything, unfortunately, at some point, that's like entropy in life. But I think as a kind of like a present of text, but used in a futuristic way, I think there is quite a bit of potential. And the way also you can think of it beyond this toy example, even though real, is if you write a guide for something broken in your lab or in your house or your workplace, and you publish it on iFixit the same way you would on OpenStreetMap or Wikipedia, and you do little photos like this, then it could become also used for an AR guide. And of course, then in prompt for us, who is here a bit more advanced, what if instead of having a photo, you had a video, or if you had a 3D model, let's say a GLTF, an animated GLTF next to the photo, and then you can like open up the model. But the point is, it's an example that is real because it comes from the iFixit API. And I'll put the link on the chat.
Thank you very much. And unless, Fabian, you have an issue, what I will do in the postings now, when there is a video like this, I will post it in the YouTube description and the link to the experience. Do you have the link to the experience available for us to also have? Because I know you tend to post them together.
Yes, it's all also, yeah, if you have a Quest, ideally a Quest 3, because or a Vision Pro, but a headset where the pass-through is in color, because otherwise, if you need to check connectors of your hardware and it's like a green cable and it's all black and white, it's a bit harder. But I mean, it would still work with pretty much any headset, Quest 1, 2, 3 Pro, Vision Pro, etc. So the video is there, and I think in the video there is no live link, but I'll update it. There are links for the iFixit disassembly guide that I used, and you can see the 2D no context versus the one in context. And I'm adding now the live link if you want to try new headset.
Thank you. And I'm looking forward to listing that on our webpage as well. So we have 10 minutes left, or depending on how we count it. Not to go into a big discussion today, but I have put up a few of Fabienne's basic thing. So if anyone has a headset now, and you want to click on that link and go into one of the ones at the bottom, I think that would be a really good use of our time. Especially you, Mark, because I'm really, based on our discussions, really looking forward to what you say about moving things about how to change it. When you look at that page, actually, you know what? I'll share it to begin with. So yeah, if you go to the page, there's a lot of stuff on this, blah, blah, blah. All of it's up for discussion. And then we get down to current state. So all of these happen to have been exported from author to XR because we can do that, right? You can do whatever you want in there. So if I click on this one, for instance, now that I'm not in XR, it'll load up with just this, right? It's just a few things on the side. Right now, obviously, because I'm on a 2D system, none of them are interactive. But here, a lot of them you can actually tap on and you will see the lines. And if it loads properly, it's actually a complete and utter mess because we need to compare these things. And then we go all the way down to simple icons. And Mark, this is specifically for you. I can't do 3D in this system. So what we have is just this. I used, as Peter, you'll be very familiar with these, plus these little boxes here, right? Just so we have the most basic things to move about. And also for you, Mark, by the way, the reason I'm talking about Mark a lot, everyone, is Mark represents our primary user now because he's an academic and he's got a specific interest in hypertext, spatial hypertext. So that's why you're going to hear Mark being said. So here we have SLP. Anybody want to guess what they stand for? Or who wants to disappoint me by not saying it? Come on, think about it. Most of what we care about is proceedings.
Yeah, this is long and short papers.
And posters.
Guessing.
Yes, 100%.
Posters. Yeah. This is really interesting because one of the reasons I was to do this was to actually dig back into the problem we skip past, which is that most of the things you start wanting to look at actually normally have an inconveniently large number of items. Not sort of millions, but normally just more than is comfortable. And so one of your first tasks is to, just winnow things through. And it was actually quite convenient you showing the last thing after that demo with all the lines in. Nothing wrong with that, but it shows this problem of sort of visual noise. So the challenge, for instance, is, okay, I've got 40 things. For instance, what's even a sensible way to bring them in? Maybe you might say, well, I'll actually have something almost like an intro and I'll have a sort of object somewhere in space and I'll pull an item out and decide, okay, I'm putting that over there. Something that is shown, I think, here is the sense of, okay, well, we can use just the presence of an object in the space to indicate probably up to about 2 or 3 different aspects of metadata. So here we're using a letter to indicate one thing, but maybe we might have the color, or we might have a shaped icon or something. So, again, it gets complex quite fast. So less is definitely more in this case. So the sort of challenge is to work out, okay, so what is the sensible range? How many colors would we even want to play with? Are they distinct enough? I mean, you can put lots in there, but that's not really the point. You want a range that that allows you to make quick and decisive things, to know that the red thing is different because it's not the blue thing. You're not worried about the shade of red and the shade of blue. What you're worried about is the two things are dissimilar. And I think that's an area that might help a lot, because one of the things that's sort of sitting at the edge of the work scenarios we've talked about is essentially this thing of, I'm probably misusing the word triage, but you're basically trying to, get your way through to a point where you now have something that you can work with in a more directed way, because essentially you've done at least the sort of first pass sort of the stuff that on the available knowledge is what you want. Now, the reality is Murphy's Law dictates that you missed a couple of important things and you have to cycle back. But that's all. We sort of know how to do those things. But it is a sense of how do I take lots of things? Because one of the things that struck me when we first started putting things into space, and we had labels for them, because why would you not have labels? And it's that's what they're called. But actually, you end up trying to read the labels, and then we have all these things about, well, are you standing where the focus is? Whereas if you know that there are things within the objects you want to look at that you are going to use to make choices about them, it might just be where you put them in the space. It's very open-ended, but the thing is, okay, so what are meaningful? What give us the affordances? Because then that marries up quite neatly with the other thing that's sort of in the article that Fred posted, which is the things like the mana menu and gestures. The two come together because in a sense, if you just try and do the gestures, well, you can make them up for an idealist situation, but then what tends to happen is you find that the situation you have isn't the one you idealized. So I think the two do actually meld together because each one constrains the other in a useful way, and that should give us something interesting to report on for the end of the project. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. And one thing that's kind of important, though, is the question of what these things are, because we're now working on authoring, not reading. So sure, we can put in some source material to go through, but the question is, what in the world are we actually going to want to have in here? There will be
very quickly, you wouldn't use that for authoring because you're taking things that already exist. So you're not authoring as I would understand it.
You can write in that space. You double tap, type or speak. You can add text in that space.
Yes, but true. But you now get a confusion of the paradigms of what you're actually trying to do in there. So they're all these things can be done. I'm not sure they make a good mix trying to mash those two together because they're not an obvious join for the level of discovery and sophistication of our knowledge in the project. That's fine.
So what we're trying to do now is, of course, authoring in XR. We have the ability to type, and we have the ability to have a traditional rectangle to type onto. That was done and presented in Chicago, of course. So now we have to decide if we're talking about nonlinear thoughts in space, what does that mean? And there's a very different use of that. If you want everything, if you want to go in and have like a memory palace type place, that is a very different thing from if you're trying to make a volume/book type thing, where you want to maybe go through the concept, which is again very different, and there's only 3 of them, from dealing with a project like the Future of Text Symposium or a project like that, right? So the scope of what you choose to put in is really, really important. Now, for most of authoring, I completely agree, this is not useful at all. But it is actually the project purpose to find out, in addition to just writing on rectangles, which we can do in XR, what would we like to do for authoring? And the final thing I really want to impress upon you all is the notion here is that whatever stuff you do in XR will be, through mechanisms, be available when a reader reads a traditional document in XR in the future. So it's not just for thinking, it can also be used for communicating. So I'm going to hear from Peter now, but from all of you, I would really, really like to hear the kind of things you would want to have in the space and why, and how they should look. Peter.
Okay, here's a really radical thought, but I've noticed that now that the Academia Edgio has its AI research assistant helping me out, I'm getting a lot of citations and references coming in via email, both in the forms of direct email citations from systems that have reminder alert systems built into them, and also in terms of newsletter subscriptions, where the newsletter will have a link out to the article on its website. So if we could bring our email inbox into XR and also be able to select an item in XR and draft a short little email, Frode, have a look at this citation, where not only would he get the citation in the email that was sent inside the headset, he'd also get some metadata that would allow his headset to provide him with the view so he could be seeing that citation in the context that I was looking at it when I decided it was really important for him to have a look at it.
So Peter, because Fabienne has to go in literally less than 1 minute, sharing citations is a very good idea, and it is very, very important. It's absolutely, when I model Mark working in this environment, one of the things I can see is you're in an external environment and you're trying to write an academic document. What do you need? You need two things. One is new thoughts and notes. The other thing is citations you may or may not use. So when in this space, I absolutely endorse having a list of all the citations or references, depending how you look at it, that you want to use. So you can do a spatial hypertext, whatever the heck you want to call it, to build, this makes sense. I'm not sure about these. Add some metadata, see how they connect. Absolutely crucial, because yes, Peter, you should absolutely be able to send a JSON to someone else where you can highlight one of these items and see, here is how I see this in context, what's going on, and send it back. That is absolutely a crucial part of the workflow. So the email beginning, not so sure about is conceivable, but Fabienne, before you go, the notion of bringing in just text, but also formatted citations, which is already what Mark has given us, makes sense, right?
Yes, and we have a couple of formats, like a different type of JSON. I forgot the ones, but to do all this. So it's already in port there, and if we want to support different formats, we can do that. It's not a problem.
Wonderful. I look forward to seeing you, Fabienne, and thank you for your woodworking comment here.
You'll show the woodworking steps also in AR soon, because it's a bunch of tools, yet more set of tools and in steps. So thanks, everyone. Take care.
Yeah,
Have a great week.
Fabienne. Mark, I need to comment on your takeaway from the testing, writing only a note. I think that's, for the record, writing in a headset right now has many benefits and many detriments, right? If we look at the headset as being as heavy and as low field of view as it is now, that is a stronger point. But there are some benefits to actually writing normal long form in a headset. First of all, the screen can be whatever size you want. Depending on your external environment, it can be quieter in there. I was lucky enough to spend the day with my wife in town because she has a Scottish holiday. We walked into a coffee shop that I've been to a few times. They have a huge window. When I write, rarely, with a headset in there, the bright light from the sun doesn't bother me because it's only projected at headsets with a virtual background. So I'm not at all saying that people should do these big things. But what I am saying is that what we are as a community pushing towards having the flexibility for different views, different layouts. Yeah, different scenarios, Mark. Exactly. That's the whole point.
I just want to stress that, because I think the danger is, I think, as I feared, you grasped unintentionally the wrong end of the stick there. I'm not saying that people are saying thou shalt never type in there, but in the context of this sort of work, of the things that we were showing them, what was interesting is no one said, "Oh, right, now I understand, do this." They all said what they unforced said, I can come in here, organize things in a way I can't do on my screen or on my desk with sort of post-it notes or something. So I can do something meaningful in this environment I can't do elsewhere. Yes, I might want to add a few annotations, or maybe, people suggested doing voice annotations, which I know has some problems of its own for some people. But essentially that could do that. That is, but it's going away and wanting to sit and type because that's more comfortable for doing something, I just think is a whole separate scenario, and we shouldn't keep trying to force these two together into some kind of a zero-sum thing, because that's not the problem.
No, absolutely. Writing, if you want to write in an XR environment, that's in a sense wholly irrelevant, because that's basically copying what we have. Completely agree. So what we need to figure out together now is, for a spatial environment where you are thinking, what aspect of thought regarding writing do you want to do in that environment? And what things should be available, and what things should we be able to produce to do that? That is our research project right now, our research question. And it is very difficult because, also as Chris, Mark, and I talked about a long time ago, when you do something mapping, thought mapping or whatever, it's often useful at the beginning of a project, or as a communication if it's really targeted to another user, really targeted, not just a mess. Is it helpful during? Probably, usually not. It is very useful, what Peter said, of presenting a tangled web of problems, right? That may be in dialogue with people, may be very useful, right? So now what we've been talking about in this session at the end here, what these little things should look at, I don't know, but now you can go on that page, which is listed under XR authoring on Future Text Lab at your convenience, play around with these little things. It's the simplest thing Fabienne has ever made. Just move them about, see how it feels. And if you have an idea for how it should be, let's try to implement it. For the next few months, we're not going to overload Fabienne at all. We're basically going to polish what was presented at ACM Hypertext. And we're going to try to have a version of this, so to speak, which is just the right amount of things in space in the right way to help someone do a bit of thinking for writing. It is not rocket science. At the end of it, it would look like we've done the most obvious thing in the world if we succeed. It's just no one else seems to be wanting to do it. So I encourage you to think about this. If you have any ideas, wish lists, chances are it's really cheap for us to do it now time-wise. So just tell us. Any final thoughts on that issue?
Have a great week.
Question. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, have a great week, guys.
See you later, Peter.
Quick question about the symposium. You had mentioned that we were all going to be giving mini talks. Do you have an approximate length on that?
Yes. What we've always done, and of course that's changed a bit, it tends to be, this year it'll probably be 10-minute talks, 5-minute dialogue.
Okay.
Which seems really, really brief, but the idea is that papers will have been shared beforehand. And those of us lucky enough to be physically together will be able to chat around these issues. But yeah, it's, yeah, Mark, that I'm remembering correctly, right?
Thank you.
Something like that. Okay.
Right, I was spacing on to that.
And do I have to bring tux and tails because it is at the Royal Society?
No.
Okay.
But
what is the approved dress code? Because I'm packing for that plus the trip for the week after.
I would encourage a basic suit, but
Okay.
maybe me as host will wear a tie, but generally not. But most of these I've been co-hosting with Vint Cerf, so I've usually worn a three-piece just to because he does. But I think we're fine.
Okay.
Business casual plus. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's going to be interesting on Thursday to be at the same venue talking about something entirely different. Mark, are you coming up for that, by the way? I know you've been invited as well.
No, I've got
Sorry.
I've got rather a lot on at the moment, but I did see that. But
See some of the old gang.
yeah,
We can change some of these things. A document-based world, I think, is definitely a positive thing for this kind of work. And of course, publishing peer-reviewed is a big thing, but even within the community, I mean, I've been trying to do it for years, send each other PDFs and whatever, and then comment on them. Maybe now because of AI, we have enough fear, so to speak, to do something like that. Literally write a letter. Oh, one more thing on that to get your feedback. Do any of you journal or write diary entries with any regularity? Seeing lots of different hand movements here, and Carl's hand is the most still. Do you find, what kind of benefit do you find from that?
I use it to straighten my own thoughts out. I tend to write, or I tend to journal specifically when I have conflicting ideas or emotions and I'm trying to figure out what is my position. Where am I holding the wrong end of the stick? Do I need to reframe this because the confusion or the grief it's causing me is distracting me from whatever it is I'm trying to get done that's, more important or more pressing. So I tend to lay that out on paper so that I can see it, because I tend to edit my own writing a lot. I'll change the verbiage in sentences. I'll reorder the paragraphs. And by having those in like discrete chunks like that I can reorganize, modify, or put into groups, it is easier for me to chunk large or complex ideas and to get a better sense of exactly what my own position is.
Carl, that makes a lot of sense. Peter, do you mind reading what you wrote just for the video? That's very nice what you said there.
Yeah, I think thing I found with writing in Wiki, I'm doing things in Federated Wiki and whatnot, is I want a private space for this. Throw my thoughts out there, see if they stick. Other people might uncover them in that private space. It's not really private, it's just obscure. Not there aren't a lot of noisy people in there. But then I want to write something, an article. I want to write something good that I want other people to say, this is something I really think, as opposed to a random brain fart that I wrote down that doesn't mean anything. And what you put that under is, I mean, do you post that? You used to be posting on Twitter or LinkedIn or some official, you write an official white paper or something really big, but most of the stuff's pretty small. It's here's my thoughts on this today. And then here's this week I write up a summary and say, here's my newsletter. But I'm not in the business of writing newsletters. I want to get my stuff done. So it's kind of a side effect of saying, I'm not a publisher. I'm not making YouTube videos of my stuff, but I want other people to take advantage of me if possible and leverage me and build on top of each other.
That's fascinating. And Peter, if you don't mind pausing a little bit longer, I'm going to ask Mark Anderson a question here. So Mark, as our prime current use person, just for context, so you probably know that I have Author for iPhone as well, right? And synchronization is not very good. But one thing that is good on all these devices is the speech to text is phenomenally better than what it used to be. So I've started journaling by speaking, right? And I do it in different ways. So I'm trying to optimize that for my own products. But now I'm just wondering, should we try to do journaling for academics? Should that actually be the work? I really want to let Mark chew on that for a bit.
I mean, I don't know, because already
Would you do
we've
it?
well, we can do anything we like, but I mean, I don't know.
No. Would
Use
you
it-
would you use it, Mark? If you had a whatever
No, I don't journal. I have a I just carry a lot of spinning plates, which just very occasionally all crash to the ground. But it's just I find the part of the problem is, so if I try journaling, I would need four of me, because I find it very difficult to pull one thing out to write on. That's a very honest answer. So it's not because I want to make the point. I'm not a Guinness at all. It's just in the way that I'm completely useless at just about any ball game. When I've tried occasionally to do journaling, it just goes off. And suddenly we're looking at Australian Railways again. You know, it's the wordy association football problem. That I seem to have really badly, but I've always had a rather hypertextual mind. So I think it helps. Journaling probably helps if you have a more disciplined sort of mind track than I do. I don't know. I'm not sure it's the most useful thing to look at now. I think we're already looking at something that's probably much more meaningful to the sponsors of the project. If you get back to the point of, well, what is work in XR? I think actually looking at things like just how you make sense of anything at all. What can you meaningfully do at the lowest level? Because all these other things build off it. So it's not that it's not worth doing or can't be done. I'm just, to answer your question, I'm genuinely not convinced it's the most useful use of the limited time left in the project at this point.
Absolutely fair enough. And let's go a little bit further. Peter, please.
Yeah. The only kind of journaling like writing that I do is when I get into literate programming processes. And when I'm doing that, I'm really, although on one hand I might want to be able to hand the program off for someone else to be able to enjoy, I'm really writing for future me. If I work out the intricacies of doing some particularly hairy thing with a version of a library as it exists at the point in time when I've written that code, And there might be a few quirks, and I want to document all of that in literate programming so that if I come back to that 2 years down the road, I'll be able to get myself back into the headspace that I was in at that time. Whereas if I just have the raw code alone, I'm going to run into problems. I might not realize why I made the design trade-offs that I did at the time. Being aware of those design trade-offs, which don't get reflected in the source code itself whatsoever, would help me decide that, now I don't want to really be using that library because I wasn't really all that happy with it 2 years ago. Now there's a much better library that I'm aware of now, so I want to rework my code to change the libraries. And without having that context and the discussion preserved in the journal/code base, I wouldn't be able to remember adequately enough to fully leverage the work that I'd already done. And on that note, I'm going to have to jump off now because I have to get ready for a presentation on Mussolini's Column and Beyond, the Evolution and Destruction of the Italian Pavilion in Chicago.
Sounds amazing, Peter. Thank you.
So I'll see you all next time.
Yeah, see you in a week. It's really interesting what Peter just said there. And I think that actually, Mark, goes a little against what you said, because my late professor from Syracuse, Ed, he kept talking about GPS. And in this, in terms of organizing, knowledge doesn't have GPS generally. And then we, of course, have talked about timelines many ways, many times in different ways, right? And what Peter was referring to now, one of the things was, I've done a thing before, why did I do it then? I'm just wondering, I think many academics are just like Mark in the sense that there's a lot of stuff going on. The way we write it will be messy. And if AI can help, that's fine, but that's not our job. But if we manage to write a way that is, so to speak, index card level, you try to put a thought, threading it will be horrible. But if you can combine a timeline of your own thoughts and meetings, for instance, let's say that we have transcripts of our meetings. We talked about this in the beginning of the project too. We wander our own thoughts, go back to our own papers, right? It may be that to really help an academic do work in XR, adding the time dimension may be more useful than having something over there or over there.
We do need to nail the basics first. The problem is the danger is that we kept being pulled off track because we see a new shiny bauble and we focus on that. So what you're mentioning is really interesting. No, and I'm not being dismissive. It's just the difficulty of remaining on course because at the bottom of this, there are people out there who, when you say work in XR, they may sort of quietly and think, really. There is some useful stuff to be done. But there is a lot of low-level stuff that I really think we need to get done and essentially into the record of the project and back to the funders. So people say, right, this has been done. You other people don't have to go and do this again. You can, here are some things that we know so broadly don't work or do work that we wouldn't have guessed before we started, because this is broadly a new area. So all these other things are possible and they're really interesting, but I think without the sort of underpinnings properly written out, we're slightly building on sand.
I'm not sure if we can write them out. I think we need to do what also I believe you've said, we need to start experimenting. And to start experimenting, I've given you guys a horrible few examples on that page that you can go and click on anytime. I think it would be really, really useful to go in there and be really annoyed and say, no, it should be like this. No, it should be like that. We absolutely need to have a normal, spatialized, putting text around in the space in a really comfortable, powerful manner. No question. Then we can look at things like clustering, hiding, linking. All of these things are not defined. We absolutely have to do that. But in order to do that, we need to know what should be in these things. And it's actually a bloody hard question. One of the things there should be, we all agree, citations, because that's part of what an academic works with. You have to remember this stuff over here or that stuff over there, yes. But what about our own thoughts? How do we put our own thoughts in a space without having long pieces of text all over the place? It can become messy.
Hearing sort of talk about things like, for instance, well, not everything needs citations. Only things that need citations need citations. The thing I keep plea for is think in generalized terms. So this is what brought me back to the sort of demo we just did. Think at the basic level. I want to look at things What I want to look at tomorrow in this set of things will not be the same as the thing I'm looking at today. Oh, to live in the wonderful world where you do the same thing every day in, day out, until you retire. But I don't know. That's sort of not where I've been lucky enough to live, or unlucky, if you, depending on your view. So, but what you do is you use the same techniques over and over again, broadly with different things. So it's the I don't know metadata, but I wish I had a better word in the moment for that. There's an information about the things you're looking at that you want. There is a very definite point that you raise up that, of course, we can't see what isn't there. So if we don't pass it, if the thing that we want to use on the holodeck, this completely constructed environment we have, for it to be on the holodeck, the system has to know about the thing that we wish to visualize. So the point is, if the information we pass into the environment doesn't have the bit of information that we actually want to sort of sort on or whatever, then we're a bit stuffed. And so there's an interesting tension there between thinking about what you want to do in the work and what you can bring in. And that's challenging, because I think a lot of people find that uncomfortable, difficult, because they'll say data in the way that lots of people say code. Nope, I'm not going there. Code, that's programming stuff. I don't do that. And a lot of people are very, very sort of viscerally against anything that there's perceived as data, despite the fact that in any other context they use it all the time. So that's another really interesting aspect that sort of come out from this project that wasn't clear in the beginning, is just how closely those two are tied in terms of what we can do.
Yes, and it's interesting how the word data seems to come from datum. Anyway, I gotta go. Sorry, my son started becoming a gamer, and he was just using gaming terms. I'm so proud. It's amazing. Edgar, come and say hi real quick. Hi. Mark, all of us agree on every single thing when it comes to that. However, we clearly see things differently. Send me, please, an email saying, I want this. I want, in the space, I want to have it this, and it should look like that. You know, and look at what look at what I've done, what I put up on the site as a springboard to disagree with, right? Because the future of text is really hard. Even, you know, when you put a sentence on paper, you put it in XR, it's still a sentence. It's still not that visual, right?
So one of the things that is interesting here is the
final notes from Mark, and then we got to go unless someone has.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So
no,
an interesting tension is between consuming in a visual way. So I need to see it in order to be able to think about it, to an abstract way. And clearly I'm more at the abstract end, because when you say, I mean, I thought I'd already described it. I don't know what more there is to describe. The ability to have an environment that's plastic enough to let me look at the things that I want. But that clearly is not sufficiently visual for others.
Mark, it's circular, by the way. Data is inherently subvertive, Tom. Yes, all speech is rhetoric. All rhetoric is persuasion. Absolutely no question. The thing is, Mark, I really like your abstract perspective. However, in a visual space, a thing has a look, right? And if you want to change how it looks to another look, it's still going to have a look. It's going to have a visual appearance. I can't ask Fabienne to build that if we don't know what it should be. So in the beginning now, I have the most boring thing for you. But if you feel that cube that's purple is more pertinent, we'll try to do that. But it has to have a visualness. That is the key thing about text. That is why all of us who are teachers, whenever a student says something, we say, write it down. Because when you write it down, like what Carl was saying, you have to make decisions. I was in town today, right? That is a very specific thing. And you keep writing. It's the same with these, whether it's glyphs in space, 3D shapes, or even, and I'm not trying to be funny, even if they're little puffy clouds, because we're trying to do something soft in a concept, it has to be instantiated in some way. I want.
Okay, well, the most useful thing to do would be to have a list of the things that I can customize in Fabienne's environment without actually having to go through an enormous arc of construction.
Anything, Mark, that you want, I promise you, okay, there may be some weird case, but almost anything can be customized.
Well, the things we discussed, you know, it's basically color, shape, and size. You can get an awful lot from that. And you know, as we said, less is more. So look, it's what can you pull through that narrow thing. Yeah, okay.
But you got to write down what you, Mark Anderson, prime user of the project, initially want. If if you say, I put a thought in space, I want it to be 12-point Roman at a certain distance. No, you don't need to do that, but you can if you want to.
I can't think like that. That's not. I'm sorry.
Okay.
That's you're asking me to do something I don't know how to do because
Okay,
that's how somebody else thinks.
Okay. If you want to have something that is a silver sphere, as you talked about a while ago, what is that silver sphere? If you're just talking about a bunch of balls, that can be a really cool interactive experience. There are some similar to that. But in order for these to have meaning to you or to someone else, there has to be a thing with a visual appearance. I'm coming, I promise. Yeah, I look forward to. Sorry, guys. Text is visual. It's got to have an appearance. You don't need to tell me the font type. You don't have to tell me the color more than blue.
Yeah, well, we're not. The good thing is we're not using text here because we're using other things as a proxy for the text because we get better data density.
If you want to do that,
that's the takeaway again from the testing we did.
Yes, but if these dots for data density don't have inherent meaning, it's not data. I mean, if you're talking about cloud layer, or if you're talking about students on a timeline or something like, fine. But if you're talking about anything that isn't explained by an XYZ key, each item will have to give some information about what it is. Otherwise, it is literally a shape in space, right? And for you as the user, for this thing here to have a meaning different from this thing here, it's not enough that they're next to each other. They have to look different because otherwise, okay.
Yes, the literality. This is what I was.
Let me just ask you a question, Mark. What type of things are you thinking of putting in this data space? Other than citations, which we agree, we will need some of them. But what kind of things are you thinking of putting in?
Well, primarily documents, which might contain anything.
Okay, but hang on. This is for writing now. This is
well, I wouldn't use this for writing for the reasons I've explained because there are better writing tools.
Then, Mark, we can't use your example. This is the authorship and XR experience. That is what we're doing now.
Well, that's fine. But when you said to me before, earlier, when they all started, so I mean, when I was surprised, I think we're going to use what you're doing as a model. I mean, I simply wouldn't, because for the sort of writing I do, this environment would not generally be useful. What it would be useful is preparing for writing. So in that sense, you could call it writing.
Fine, but it still has to be something other than documents. It has to be something other than what other people have written, right?
Well, yes, so there's a danger of being literal. One could be too literal and say the last thing mentioned is the only thing mentioned. So, documents represent many things. Some people would say, when you say document, will assume it to be maybe a paper, for sake of argument. It could just be a bunch of text that you wrote
Mark,
because it was supposed to.
The whole family's waiting downstairs.
Okay.
If you want to have things in the space, you got to write down what they are and how they appear. Otherwise, we can't do them. Anyway, good talk today, guys. Look forward to seeing you in a week. Bye.